In a small town where lonely hearts find unexpected connections, Jack Monroe's skilled hands have fixed everything but the emptiness in his own life. When Sarah Thompson wheels into his garage one afternoon, her captivating smile brightening, his dusty workshop, something stirs in the veteran mechanic's heart. Her determination shines through despite a failing prosthetic she can barely afford, and in her eyes he sees a reflection of his own resilience. Night after night, he works by lamplight, crafting not just a new limb from spare parts, but building a bridge between two souls. As dawn breaks and the sound of rotor blades pierces the morning silence, Jack discovers that what began as a simple repair might heal two hearts that had long forgotten how to dream. Could this chance encounter between a humble mechanic and a mysterious woman transform from compassion into love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Monroe's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Jack Monroe wiped his calloused hands on a red shop rag that had seen better days, just like everything else in his workshop. At 58, his salt and pepper hair and weathered face told stories of countless hours spent beneath car hoods and behind welding masks. His father's toolbox sat in its place of honor on the workbench, its dented metal surface reflecting decades of use. Jack ran his fingers over the worn initials TM scratched into the lid. Thomas Monroe, the man who taught him that fixing things wasn't just about tools and parts, but about understanding the soul of machinery. The shop phone rang, its old-fashioned bell echo bouncing off the corrugated metal walls. Mrs. Henderson's Buick was acting up again. Jack smiled, knowing exactly what the problem would be. She always forgot to check her oil. These were the moments he lived for, not because they paid well, they rarely did, but because they reminded him of why he'd chosen this life. 3 framed certificates hung crooked on the wall behind his desk, barely visible through years of accumulated dust. They spoke of technical excellence and mechanical innovation, dreams of bigger things that had slowly faded into the comfortable routine of small-town life. Jack had once imagined designing prosthetics for veterans inspired by his time serving as a mechanic in the army. But life had other plans, and his father's failing health had brought him back to Millbrook to take over the family business. The workshop was quiet, except for the steady hum of the ancient fan and the occasional ping of cooling metal. Jack moved between the 3 cars currently occupying his bay spaces: a minivan with transmission troubles, a pickup truck needing brake work, and an old Volkswagen Beetle that would need more love than its owner could probably afford. He approached each with the same careful attention, the same respect for the engineering beneath the surface. His own innovations were scattered throughout the shop: a modified lift system he'd designed for working on heavier vehicles, custom tools he'd fabricated when standard ones wouldn't do the job, and a computer system cobbled together from spare parts that ran surprisingly efficient diagnostic software he'd learned to code himself. These were the fruits of late nights when sleep wouldn't come, when the emptiness of his small apartment above the shop drove him back downstairs to tinker and create. The local paper lay open on his desk, folded to the classifieds where he'd circled an ad for an apprentice. 20 years ago, he would have had young mechanics lining up for the chance to learn at Monroe's. Now, with the chain stores and their flashy diagnostics machines drawing all the business to the highway, he struggled to keep up with the work on his own. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and the days felt longer. But there was pride in every repair, every solution he crafted from experience and intuition. The walls of his office were lined with thank you cards and photographs. A teenage girl standing proudly beside her first car that Jack had helped her restore. An elderly couple in front of their RV that he'd kept running for their cross-country. Dreams. A local farmer with the tractor Jack had modified for his arthritis. These weren't just repairs. They were pieces of people's lives he'd helped maintain. The morning light had strengthened now, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Jack checked his appointment book. A leather-bound volume his mother had given him when he first took over the shop. He ran his finger down the day's schedule, noting the open slot at 2 o'clock. Something about that empty space made him pause, as if it were waiting for something important. He looked up at the small mirror hung beside the office door, catching sight of the grease smudge on his cheek and the threads of silver in his beard. The eyes that looked back at him were tired but alert, crow's feet etched deep from years of squinting at engine parts and smiling at grateful customers. His blue work shirt with Jack embroidered in faded thread above the pocket had been washed so many times it was nearly white at the seams. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9, and Jack straightened his back, ready to face another day of coaxing life back into machines that others might have given up on. He couldn't know that the empty slot in his schedule would bring something far more challenging than any engine he'd ever repaired. Something that would require him to fix not just a piece of machinery, but perhaps his own heart as well. The afternoon sun had reached its peak when the unfamiliar sound of wheels on gravel drew Jack's attention. Through the workshop's open door, he watched a woman navigate her wheelchair with precise movements, her determination evident in every push forward. Her dark hair caught the sunlight, and despite the obvious strain of movement, she held herself with unmistakable dignity. "Hello," she called out, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to fill the dusty space. "I'm looking for Mr. Monroe." Jack stepped out from behind the Volkswagen he'd been working on, wiping his hands on his shop rag. "That'd be me, Jack Monroe." He noticed the way her prosthetic leg moved stiffly with each small adjustment of her position, the mechanical joints, protesting with quiet squeaks. "Sarah Thompson," she replied, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her smile genuine, though he could see the tension around her eyes. "I heard you're the man who can fix anything." "I do my best," Jack said, suddenly conscious of the grease under his fingernails. "What can I help you with?" Sarah gestured to her prosthetic leg. "It's not exactly a carburetor, but I was hoping you might take a look. The hydraulics are failing, and the closest prosthetics clinic is 3 hours away." She paused, a flash of vulnerability crossing her face. "And honestly, I can't afford their prices right now." Jack knelt to examine the prosthetic, his experienced eyes taking in the worn components and makeshift repairs. It was a basic model, functional but far from the advanced units he'd seen in his research years ago. "May I?" he asked, waiting for her nod before gently testing the joint movement. "The response is delayed," Sarah explained, watching his careful examination. "And sometimes it locks up entirely. I've been managing with WD-40 and hope, but..." She let out a small laugh that couldn't quite hide her frustration. Jack felt something stir in his chest, a familiar excitement he got when faced with an interesting, technical challenge, but mixed with something else. Something about the way she spoke, the quiet strength in her voice resonated with him. "Mind telling me how this happened?" he asked, continuing his inspection. "Might help me understand what we're dealing with." "Car accident 3 years ago," Sarah replied, her voice matter-of-fact, but with an undercurrent of emotion. "I was lucky, really. Some people lose a lot more." She adjusted her position, and Jack noticed how she winced slightly at the movement. "This model," Jack began, recognition dawning. "It's a Thompson Series 3, isn't it? Basic but reliable. Or it should be." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know prosthetics?" "Used to dream of designing them, actually. Back when I got out of the army." Jack stood, his knees protesting the movement. "Never got the chance to pursue it, but I kept up with the field. Sort of a hobby now." A moment of understanding passed between them, and Sarah's smile softened. "Seems like more than a hobby, Mr. Monroe." "Jack," he corrected gently. "And maybe..." "You're right." He moved to his workbench, already mentally cataloguing the tools and materials he'd need. "I can't promise anything, but I'd like to try helping, if you'll trust a mechanic with this." Trust has to start somewhere, Sarah said, watching him gather tools. She hesitated, then added, though I should warn you, my schedule's a bit unpredictable. I might need to work around some commitments. Jack caught something in her tone, a careful choice of words that suggested there was more to her story. But everyone had their secrets, and right now, what mattered was the challenge before him. Well, Miss Thompson, Sarah, she interrupted with a smile. Sarah, he continued, returning the smile, let's see what we can do about getting you moving more smoothly. He pulled up his worn office chair for her. First, tell me exactly when these problems started. As Sarah began describing the prosthetic's deterioration, Jack found himself drawn not just to the technical puzzle, but to the way her eyes lit up when she spoke, the subtle hints of humor in her descriptions, the grace with which she handled her limitations. Her presence brought something new to his workshop, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun still streaming through the windows. Neither of them could have known then how this simple consultation would change both their lives. But as Jack listened and made notes in his weathered notebook, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sensation that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Long after Sarah had left, Jack sat at his workbench, surrounded by sketches and technical manuals he hadn't touched in years. The workshop's overhead lights cast a yellow glow over the papers, his pencil moving swiftly across graph paper as he worked out preliminary designs. The broken prosthetic lay before him, its worn components telling a story of makeshift repairs and daily struggles. "What are you thinking, old man?" he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. The challenge before him was far more complex than anything he'd tackled in years. One wrong calculation, one misaligned component, and he could make things worse instead of better. His computer screen displayed research he'd been doing since Sarah left, patents, technical specifications, medical requirements. The more he read, the more he realized how far prosthetic technology had advanced since his army days. But the newest designs were far beyond what he could create with his limited resources. The wall clock showed 11:30 p.m. when his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Just wanted to check if you're still willing to take this on. No pressure if it's too complicated." Jack smiled, typing back, "Already started. Get some rest." He hesitated, then added, "See you tomorrow at 2. Her response came quickly. "I'll bring coffee." The promise of coffee shouldn't have made his heart beat faster, but it did. Jack turned back to his sketches, energized. He'd need to fabricate custom components. The hydraulic system would be the biggest challenge. But maybe he moved to his storage room, pulling out boxes of salvaged parts he'd collected over the years, aircraft hydraulics, precision automotive components, high-grade materials that were too good to throw away. Each piece represented a potential solution, a way to craft something unique. The night deepened as Jack worked, measuring, calculating, testing ideas. He created 3 different design concepts, each with its own advantages and challenges. The first focused on durability, using reinforced joints and a simplified hydraulic system. The second prioritized smooth movement, with more complex mechanics but higher maintenance needs. The third was a hybrid approach, balancing reliability with function. Around 2 a.m., he found himself staring at his father's old toolbox. "What would you think of this, Dad?" he wondered aloud. "Your son, the mechanic, trying to build something that belongs in a medical lab." He could almost hear his father's voice. "Tools are tools, son. It's the heart behind them that matters." Dawn was breaking when Jack finally crawled up to his apartment above the shop. His dreams were filled with mechanical drawings and Sarah's smile. The next afternoon, Sarah arrived precisely at 2, balancing 2 coffee cups on her lap as she maneuvered through the door. Jack hurried to help her, trying not to notice how his fingers tingled when they brushed against hers. "Black, 2 sugars," she said, handing him a cup. "I guessed." "Good guess," he replied, surprised. Most people assumed he'd want it with cream. Sarah wheeled herself to his workbench, her eyes widening at the array of sketches. "You've been busy." "Couldn't sleep," Jack admitted, spreading out the three main designs. "I have some ideas, but I need your input. You're the one who'll be using it." For the next hour, they pored over the designs together. Sarah asked surprisingly technical questions, showing an understanding that went beyond what Jack would expect from most patients. When he mentioned this, she smiled mysteriously. "I've had 3 years to learn everything I can about prosthetics," she said. "Knowledge is power, right?" Jack noticed how she leaned forward when particularly interested in a detail, how her fingers traced the lines of his drawings with careful precision. There was something almost familiar about her analytical approach, but he couldn't place it. "This hybrid design," she said, pointing to his third concept. "It's innovative. I've never seen this kind of adaptation of automotive hydraulics for prosthetic use." "It's not conventional," Jack acknowledged. "Might not work at all. But if it does," he trailed off, watching her face light up with understanding. "If it does, it could be replicated at a fraction of the cost of current systems," she finished his thought. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Sarah broke the silence first, clearing her throat. "How long do you think it would take to build?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, Jack estimated. "I'll need to fabricate some custom parts, run multiple tests. We can't rush this." "No," she agreed softly. "We can't." She checked her phone, and a shadow crossed her face. "I have a meeting I can't miss, but I want to help with this, Jack. Not just as a patient. I have some experience with product development that might be useful." There it was again, that hint of something more in her background. But Jack just nodded. "Same time tomorrow?" "Actually," Sarah said, "I was thinking of coming by in the evening. Fewer interruptions. If that works for you." The prospect of evening work sessions with Sarah made Jack's pulse quicken. "Works for me. I'm usually here anyway." As he watched her leave, Jack realized he was in dangerous territory. This project was awakening something in him. Not just his old dreams of prosthetic design, but feelings he'd thought long buried. And Sarah, there was more to her story than she was sharing. But standing amid his sketches and tools, coffee cup still warm in his hand, Jack knew he was already too invested to turn back. Whatever secrets Sarah might be keeping, whatever challenges lay ahead, he was committed now to the project and perhaps to something more. The evening sessions with Sarah quickly became the highlight of Jack's days. They fell into an easy routine. She would arrive as the sun was setting, often bringing dinner along with coffee, and they would work late into the night. The workshop, usually filled with the sounds of engines and tools, now resonated with their conversations and shared laughter. Tonight, Sarah had brought Chinese takeout, and they sat at his workbench, blueprints pushed aside to make room for containers of kung pao chicken and chow mein. Jack watched as she deftly manipulated the chopsticks, noticing how she'd adapted. Her movements to maintain perfect control despite her wheelchair. "You're staring," she said, not looking up from her food. "Sorry," Jack replied, feeling his ears redden. "I was just admiring your technique with those. I can barely manage a fork some days." Sarah laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the whole workshop. "Years of practice. You should have seen me the first few months after the accident. I wore more food than I ate." "What happened?" Jack asked softly, realizing this was the first time she'd mentioned the accident since their initial meeting. "If you don't mind talking about it." Sarah was quiet for a moment, pushing noodles around her container. Rain-slicked roads, a truck driver who'd fallen asleep at the wheel, the usual story. She looked up, meeting his eyes. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part was what came after. What came after? Learning to live differently. Finding out who your real friends are. Discovering that some doors close. She gestured to her prosthetic leg, while others open. Her eyes traveled around the workshop, taking in the organized chaos of tools and parts. "Like this one," Jack felt the weight of her words, understanding there was more she wasn't saying. Must have been tough, going through that alone. "Who says I was alone?" Sarah responded, but something in her tone suggested otherwise. She quickly changed the subject. "How's the hydraulic system coming along?" Jack recognized the deflection, but didn't push. Instead, he reached for the prototype they'd been working on. "Made some progress today. Want to see?" The prototype was beginning to take shape, a marriage of automotive precision and medical necessity. Jack had adapted a small hydraulic system from a high-end racing clutch, modifying it to provide the smooth, controlled movement Sarah needed. The outer casing was still rough, but the internal mechanisms were nearly complete. "The response time is the tricky part," he explained, demonstrating the action. "Too fast, and it's jarring. Too slow, and it feels unnatural. We need to find exactly the right balance." Sarah wheeled closer, her shoulder brushing against his as she leaned in to examine the mechanism. Jack tried to ignore the warmth of her presence, the subtle scent of her shampoo. "What if," she said, reaching past him to point at a particular component, "we adjusted the pressure here? In my experience—" She stopped abruptly. "Your experience?" Jack prompted gently. Sarah withdrew slightly, and Jack could almost see her internal debate. Finally, she sighed. "I may have done some consulting work in medical device development before the accident." "Some consulting work," Jack repeated, pieces starting to fall into place. Her technical knowledge, her understanding of product development, those mysterious meetings she had to attend. "Sarah, who are you really?" She met his gaze steadily. "Someone who's tired of being defined by her name or her bank account. Can that be enough for now?" Jack studied her face, the genuine plea in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Whatever her secret was, it clearly weighed on her. "Yeah," he said finally, "that can be enough." Relief flooded her features, and she gave him a smile that made his heart skip. "Thank you, Jack." They worked late that night, the prototype taking shape under their combined expertise. Sarah's suggestions, drawn from what she now admitted was extensive experience in medical device development, proved invaluable. Jack found himself repeatedly impressed by her technical insight and practical solutions. As midnight approached, he noticed her stifling a yawn. "We should call it a night," he said, reluctant to end their time together, but concerned about her fatigue. "Just a little longer," she protested, but her eyes were heavy. "We're so close to solving the pressure distribution issue, the prototype." "We'll still be here tomorrow," Jack assured her, already moving to help clear their dinner containers. "Speaking of which, will you be coming by?" Sarah's face fell slightly. "I have meetings all day tomorrow. Corporate stuff I can't reschedule, but I could come by the day after." "The day after is perfect," Jack said, trying not to show his disappointment about missing a day. He'd grown accustomed to their evening routine, the way they worked together, the comfortable silences, punctuated by bursts of technical discussion and personal revelations. As he helped her navigate toward the door, Sarah paused. "Jack," she turned her wheelchair to face him, "thank you for not pushing. About who I am. It's refreshing." "We all have our stories," he replied. "They come out when they're ready." She reached up and squeezed his hand, the touch sending electricity through his arm. "Good night, Jack." After she left, Jack stood in the workshop doorway, watching until her car's taillights disappeared around the corner. The night air was cool, but his hand still felt warm where she had touched it. He turned back to the workbench, to the prototype they were creating together, and realized that somewhere between the technical discussions and shared meals, Sarah Thompson had become more than just a client, much more. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm of creation and discovery. Jack's workshop transformed into something between a medical laboratory and an inventor's sanctuary. New tools appeared alongside his traditional wrenches and socket sets, precision, measuring devices, specialized testing equipment, and materials he'd never worked with before. He didn't question where Sarah got them. He was learning that she had resources she preferred not to discuss. One evening, as Jack machined a custom joint component, Sarah watched from her wheelchair, taking notes on a tablet. She'd switched from her business attire to casual clothes, jeans and a soft grey sweater that made her look more relaxed, more herself. "The tolerance has to be perfect," Jack muttered, more to himself than to her. A fraction of a millimetre off, and the whole mechanism could bind. "You've done this kind of precision work before?" Sarah asked, wheeling closer to observe. Jack smiled, not taking his eyes off the lathe. "Remember that Jaguar E-Type that came through last month? The owner needed a custom camshaft. Sometimes the old parts just don't exist anymore, so you have to make them." "That's what drew me to you," Sarah said softly, then quickly added, "To your workshop, I mean. Your reputation for solving impossible problems." Jack felt his cheeks warm at her slip, but kept his focus on the work. "No such thing as impossible problems. Just solutions we haven't found yet." The component took shape under his careful guidance, metal curling away in precise ribbons. When he finally held it up to the light, Sarah leaned in close, her shoulder pressing against his arm. "It's beautiful," she said, and Jack wasn't sure if she meant the craftsmanship or something more. "Want to try fitting it?" he asked, moving toward the prototype they'd been assembling. The basic structure was complete now, looking more like a proper prosthetic than a collection of parts. Sarah nodded, and Jack knelt beside her wheelchair. This had become another part of their routine, the careful removal of her current prosthetic, the gentle handling of tender skin and scarred tissue. He'd learned to read her expressions, to know when something caused discomfort, even if she didn't say it. "The socket alignment feels different," she commented as he attached the prototype. "More natural? I modified the angle based on your gait analysis," Jack explained. "Should reduce strain on your hip." He didn't mention the hours he'd spent studying biomechanics after she'd left each night, determined to understand every aspect of what she needed. Sarah tested the movement, her face lighting up at the smooth response. "Jack, it's incredible." She reached down to touch the mechanism, her fingers brushing against his, where they still rested on the prosthetic. Neither of them moved. For a moment, the contact electric between them. Then Sarah's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Her expression changed as she checked the message. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, noting the tension that had returned to her shoulders. "Just business," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The board, they're expecting some big announcements soon." She caught herself. "The charity board, I mean. I do some volunteer work." Jack nodded, pretending to accept the obvious deflection. He was getting better at recognizing when Sarah was hiding something, and better at letting her keep her secrets. Instead, he focused on adjusting the hydraulic pressure in the new joint. "Tell me about your dreams," Sarah said suddenly, surprising. The ones you had before you came back to run the shop." Jack's hands stilled on the prosthetic. "Pretty simple, really. Wanted to design medical devices, especially prosthetics. Had some ideas about making them more accessible, more affordable." He shrugged. Life had other plans. "Why didn't you try again? After your father..." "Money," Jack answered honestly. "Starting a medical device company takes capital, lots of it, and by then I had employees depending on me, customers who trusted me, couldn't just walk away." Sarah was quiet for a long time, absently running her fingers along the prototype's smooth surface. "What if you had the capital?" she asked finally. "What would you do with it? Create something like this?" Jack gestured to the prosthetic. "But better. Make it available to people who can't afford the fancy clinic versions. Use mechanical expertise to solve medical problems." He laughed softly. "Silly dreams for an old mechanic, right?" "Not silly at all," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Jack, She stopped as her phone buzzed again, this time when she checked it. She paled slightly. "I have to go. Early meeting tomorrow." Jack helped her switch back to her regular prosthetic, trying not to feel disappointed at the abbreviated evening. As he assisted her into her car, Sarah caught his hand. "Your dreams matter, Jack," she said intently. "Don't ever think they don't." He watched her drive away, wondering at the urgency in her voice. Back in the workshop, he noticed she'd left her tablet on the workbench. The screen had gone dark, but the manufacturer's logo caught his eye. Thompson Medical Technologies. Jack set the tablet aside without waking it. Whatever Sarah's connection to one of the largest medical device companies in the country was, she'd tell him when she was ready. For now, he had work to do. Late into the night, Jack continued refining the prototype, each adjustment bringing it closer to completion. But his mind kept returning to Sarah's questions about his dreams, and to the way her hand had felt in his. The first major test of the prototype didn't go as planned. Jack stood behind Sarah as she gripped the parallel bars they'd set up in a cleared section of the workshop, her knuckles white with tension. The new prosthetic was attached, its mechanisms gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Ready?" Jack asked, his hands hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if needed. Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She pushed herself up from her wheelchair, and for a moment everything seemed perfect. Then the hydraulic system stuttered, the pressure release timing off by a fraction of a second. Sarah stumbled, and Jack caught her, pulling her against his chest to keep her from falling. Time seemed to stop. Jack was acutely aware of her breathing. Quick and shallow, her hands gripping his forearms, her body warm against his. For a heartbeat, neither moved. "I've got you," he said softly, and felt her relax slightly in his arms. "I know," she whispered, then slowly steadied herself. "Let's try again." But the second attempt wasn't any better, nor was the third. After an hour of adjustments and failed attempts, frustration radiated from Sarah in waves. She sat in her wheelchair, massaging her thigh above the prosthetic socket while Jack examined the problematic joint. "The pressure distribution is off," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "We're getting microsecond delays in the hydraulic response." "I thought we solved that with the new valve design," Sarah said, leaning forward to look at the component he was studying. "So did I." Jack ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. The simulations all looked perfect. Reality rarely matches simulations, Sarah said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "I learned that the hard way." Jack looked up at her tone. "Want to talk about it?" Sarah was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Before my accident, I was working on a major medical device project. The simulations were flawless, the lab tests perfect. But when we moved to human trials," she trailed off, lost in memory. "Let's just say I learned that theory, and practice don't always align." Jack watched her face, seeing the pain of old wounds. "What happened? Someone got hurt?" "Not badly, but—" She shook her head. "I swore I'd never rush development again, never let pressure from—" She stopped abruptly, that familiar guard coming back up. "Pressure from the board?" Jack guessed gently. Sarah's eyes snapped to his face. "How did you—" "Your tablet," he said. "Thompson Medical Technologies. I didn't snoop," he added quickly. "Just saw the logo." Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly. "And you didn't say anything?" "Not my secret to tell," Jack shrugged, turning back to the prosthetic. "Or to ask about." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Sarah wheeled closer, her hand coming to rest on his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not pushing, for letting me just be me." Jack covered her hand with his own, rough fingers gentle against her smooth skin. "That's all I've ever wanted you to be." The moment stretched, charged with possibility, until a loud clang from outside made them both jump. One of Jack's regular customers had pulled up, engine knocking badly. Sarah withdrew her hand, composing herself. "You should take care of that. I can work on the pressure calculations while you're busy." For the next few hours, they worked in comfortable parallel, Jack dealing with the customer's engine, Sarah at his computer running simulations. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the workshop windows, Jack finished with the engine repair and returned to find Sarah surrounded by printouts and calculations. "I think I found the problem," she said without looking up. "We were calculating the pressure distribution based on standard prosthetic models, but those assume—" She trailed off as Jack set a fresh cup of coffee by her hand. "You remembered how I take it. 2 sugars, splash of cream." Jack said, settling into the chair beside her. Hard to forget, Sarah smiled, then turned back to her calculations. Look here, if we adjust the baseline assumptions to account for my specific gait pattern, they worked late into the night, redesigning the hydraulic system. Jack found himself repeatedly distracted by the way Sarah bit her lip when concentrating, how her eyes lit up when she solved a particularly tricky equation, the casual way she'd touch his arm to get his attention. Around midnight, they were ready to test again. This time, when Sarah gripped the parallel bars, Jack could see the difference in her confidence. The socket feels more stable, she noted as she pushed herself up. The first step was tentative, careful. The second was stronger. By the third, she was smiling. The response time is perfect, she said, wonder in her voice. She took another step, then another, each one smoother than the last. Jack, you did it! We did it, he corrected, still spotting her but no longer needing to. It was your calculations that... He didn't finish because Sarah had turned within the parallel bars and thrown her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Jack's arms went around her automatically, supporting her as much as holding her. Thank you, she whispered against his neck, for not giving up. Jack was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the soft brush of her hair against his cheek, of how perfectly she fit against him. Never, he promised, and felt her shiver slightly at his tone. When she pulled back, their faces were inches apart. Jack could see flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could feel her breath on his lips. For a moment, he thought, a car alarm blared in the distance, shattering the moment. Sarah stepped back carefully, her cheeks flushed. I should go. It's late, and I have a board meeting tomorrow. As Jack helped her switch back to her regular prosthetic, neither mentioned their almost kiss. But something had shifted between them. The air felt charged with possibility and unspoken words. At her car, Sarah paused. Jack, tomorrow, can we try some more advanced mobility tests? Whatever you need, he said, and they both knew he meant more than just the prosthetic testing. After she left, Jack stood in the workshop doorway, watching her taillights disappear into the night. The prototype sat on his workbench, its successful test a triumph of engineering and collaboration. But all he could think about was the feel of Sarah in his arms and how close he'd come to kissing her. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow they'd test the prosthetic again and maybe, just maybe, test something else as well. The next day's testing began differently. Sarah arrived wearing workout clothes instead of her usual business attire, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more relaxed, though Jack noticed shadows under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much. Rough board meeting? He asked, helping her transfer to his work chair. You could say that? She managed a tired smile. But let's focus on something more important. Her eyes went to the prototype, which Jack had spent the morning refining. Based on yesterday's success, the prosthetic now gleamed under the workshop lights, its mechanisms more polished, its movements nearly silent. Jack had worked since dawn, driven by the memory of Sarah's joy during yesterday's successful test, and if he was honest, by the memory of how it felt to hold her. I made some adjustments to the ankle articulation, he explained, kneeling to help her with the fitting. Should give you better balance on uneven surfaces. Sarah nodded, but Jack noticed her breath catch when his fingers brushed against her skin during the attachment. He pretended not to notice, focusing instead on checking. The alignment. Ready to try something more challenging? He asked, standing and offering his hands. Sarah took them without hesitation, her trust in him evident. What did you have in mind? Jack helped her up, steadying her as she found her balance. How about we lose the parallel bars today? Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. Instead of moving to the bars, Jack kept hold of her hands, stepping backward slowly and drawing her with him. Just like dancing, he said softly, guiding her forward. Sarah's laugh was breathless. Been a while since I danced. Me too, Jack admitted, carefully releasing one of her hands while keeping the other firmly clasped. But some things you don't forget. They moved slowly across the workshop floor, Sarah's steps growing more confident with each passing minute. The prototype responded perfectly, each movement smooth and natural. Jack found himself watching her face more than her feet. The way her eyes shone with determination, the slight part of her lips as she concentrated. "This is amazing," Sarah said, releasing his other hand to stand independently. "The response time, the stability." She took a few steps on her own, then turned back to him with tears in her eyes. "Jack, do you realize what you've created?" "What we've created," he corrected, closing the distance between them. "This wouldn't exist without your insights, your calculations." "Your hands," she interrupted softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. "Your heart." The workshop seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in this moment. Jack's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. Sarah's eyes met his, and this time there was no car alarm, no interruption to break. The tension. Jack leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if he'd misread the moment. But Sarah rose slightly on her toes, meeting him halfway. Their lips met softly, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be. Sweet, questioning, full of promise. Sarah's hand slid from his, cheek to the back of his neck, drawing him closer. Jack's arms wrapped around her waist, supporting her as much as holding her. When they finally parted, Sarah stayed in the circle of his arms, her eyes still closed. "I've wanted to do that for days," she whispered. "Only days," Jack murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. "Feels like I've been waiting forever." Sarah's eyes opened, and something like sadness flickered in their depths. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you." The workshop door chimed, announcing a customer's arrival. Jack, reluctant, stepped back, keeping one hand on Sarah's waist until he was sure she was steady. "Go," she said, giving him a small smile. "We can talk later." But as Jack dealt with the customer's car troubles, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. When he returned to the workshop proper, Sarah was sitting in her wheelchair again, her tablet in her lap, all business once more. "I have to go," she said before he could speak. "But Jack..." She waited until he met her eyes. "What happened today? The breakthrough, the kiss. It meant everything to me. Please remember that." She left before he could respond, leaving him standing in the middle of his workshop, the ghost of her kiss still on his lips, and a growing sense that their story was about to become much more complicated. Sarah didn't come to the workshop the next day, or the day after. Instead, a series of detailed emails arrived with technical specifications and suggestions for final adjustments. Each was signed simply S, professional and distant, so unlike their recent intimacy that it made Jack's chest ache. On the third day, she finally appeared as the sun was setting. She wore a crisp business suit, her hair pulled back severely, but Jack could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "Ready for the final fitting?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jack nodded, gesturing to the completed prosthetic. He'd spent the past 3 days perfecting every detail, channeling his confusion and longing into meticulous craftsmanship. The result was beautiful. A seamless blend of function and form, every component refined to perfection. "It's gorgeous," Sarah whispered, her professional facade cracking slightly. She reached out to touch it, fingers trailing along the smooth surface. "Let's see how it feels," Jack said softly, moving to help her. Despite the awkwardness between them, their bodies remembered this dance. Her hand on his shoulder, his careful support as she transferred from the wheelchair. The fitting process was intimate by necessity, but now each touch felt charged with meaning. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he made the final adjustments, and he saw goosebumps rise on Sarah's skin when his hand brushed her thigh. "The alignment feels perfect," she said, her voice husky, then softer. "Everything about this feels perfect." Jack looked up, meeting her eyes, seeing in them the same longing he felt. "Sarah, please," she interrupted, placing a finger against his lips. Let's Let's just have this moment before everything changes." "What's going to change?" he asked against her finger. Instead of answering, she removed her finger from his lips and replaced it with her mouth, kissing him with an intensity that took his breath away. Jack responded instinctively, pulling her closer, pouring all his confusion and desire into the kiss. When they parted, Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Help me stand." Jack helped her up, watching in awe as she took her first steps with the completed prosthetic. Her movement was smooth, natural, almost indistinguishable from biological motion. She walked to the full-length mirror he'd installed for testing, staring at her reflection. "Look what you've created," she said, her voice full of wonder. "Look what you can do," he countered, moving to stand behind her. Their eyes met in the mirror, the humble mechanic in his worn work clothes, the elegant woman in her tailored suit. Such an unlikely pair, yet somehow perfectly matched. Sarah turned, in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "Jack Monroe, you are the most extraordinary man I've ever met." "Sarah, no, let me finish. You took spare parts and determination and created something revolutionary. Do you understand that? This isn't just a prosthetic. This is hope. Affordable hope for people who thought they'd never walk naturally again." Jack could hear something in her voice, pride mixed with pain, joy tinged with fear. "Why do I feel like you're saying goodbye?" Sarah's hand dropped from his face. "Because tomorrow everything changes. Tomorrow you'll understand why She stopped, swallowing hard. "Tomorrow you'll know everything." "Tell me now," Jack pleaded softly. She shook her head, stepping back. "I can't. Not yet." "But Jack," she reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Remember how you trusted me all these weeks. Trust me one more day. Please." How could he refuse her anything? Jack nodded, bringing their joined hands to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "One more day." Sarah's smile was bittersweet. "Test the range of motion with me? One last time?" They spent the next hour putting the prosthetic through its paces. Sarah walked, turned, even attempted a few dance steps in Jack's arms. Every movement was perfect, every response exactly as they'd designed. But underlying it all was a current of farewell that Jack couldn't understand. As Jack helped her switch back to her original prosthetic, Sarah suddenly wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her tightly, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "Tomorrow," she whispered against his shirt, "be ready at dawn." Then she was gone, leaving Jack alone in his workshop with their creation and a heart full of questions. He stood at the door watching her taillights disappear, wondering what tomorrow would bring and why it felt like everything he'd grown to love was about to change forever. Dawn broke over Monroe's auto repair in a wash of pale gold light. Jack had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between pacing his apartment and staring at the prosthetic they'd created together. Now he stood in his workshop, nursing a cup of coffee, waiting for whatever change Sarah had promised. The sound came first, a distant thrum that grew into a thunderous beating of air. Jack stepped outside, shielding his eyes against the rising sun as a sleek black helicopter descended into the parking lot, its rotors whipping up dust and loose papers. His heart stopped when he saw the logo on the side, Thompson Medical Technologies. The helicopter touched down with precise control, its blades slowing as the passenger door opened. Sarah emerged, but not the Sarah he knew. This Sarah wore a perfectly tailored designer suit, her hair expertly styled, her bearing unmistakably that of someone used to command. She moved with confident grace on their prosthetic, making her way toward him as several business-suited executives exited the helicopter behind her. "Hello, Jack," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the dying rotor noise. "I believe I owe you an explanation. Sarah Thompson," he said slowly, realization dawning, "as in Thompson Medical Technologies. You're not just named after the company." "I'm the CEO," she confirmed quietly, "and the majority shareholder. The company was my father's legacy, and now it's mine." One of the executives stepped forward, extending a leather portfolio. "Ms. Thompson, the papers are ready." Sarah waved him back, her eyes never leaving Jack's face. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but every time I started to explain, I remembered how it felt to be just Sarah with you. Not the CEO, not the heiress, just me." Jack's mind was spinning, pieces falling into place. Her technical knowledge, her mysterious meetings, the tablet, all the signs he'd ignored or explained away. The board meetings, the pressure you mentioned about rushing development. After my accident, I pushed our R&D team too hard trying to develop better prosthetics. When the prototype failed in trials, I swore I'd never let corporate deadlines compromise development again. She gestured to her leg. "That's why I came to you. I needed to understand if a different approach was possible. So I was what? A research experiment?" The words tasted bitter in his mouth. "No!" Sarah stepped closer, reaching for his hand, but Jack stepped back. Her face fell. "You were hope, Jack. Hope that someone with pure intentions and raw talent could create something revolutionary." She smiled sadly. "And you did." One of the executives cleared his throat. "Ms. Thompson, the board is waiting." Sarah nodded without looking away from Jack. "What you've created here, it's exactly what the medical device industry needs. Affordable, reliable prosthetics that could help thousands of people." She took a deep breath. "That's why I'm here. Thompson Medical Technologies wants to offer you a partnership. Full funding to develop and manufacture your design, with you heading the new division." Jack stared at her, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. "A partnership? You'd have complete creative control," Sarah continued, quickly. "No corporate pressure, no rushed deadlines, just your vision with the resources to make it reality." She paused, then added softly, "Everything you once dreamed of." The morning sun caught the helicopter's rotors, sending flashes of light across Sarah's face. She looked both familiar and strange. His Sarah and this powerful CEO somehow merged into one person. "And us?" he asked quietly. "Was any of that real?" Sarah's professional composure cracked. "All of it. Every moment, every conversation, every—" She stopped, glancing at her waiting executives. "Jack, please, take some time to think about it. Review the proposal. This could change everything, not just for you, but for people who need what you can create." She motioned to one of the executives, who stepped forward with a thick envelope. "All the details are in here. Legal structure, funding, everything." She met Jack's eyes. "I'll be in my office at headquarters when you're ready to talk." About any of it. The implied meaning was clear. They had more than just business to discuss. But as Jack watched Sarah walk back to the helicopter, her expensive heels clicking on the concrete, he wondered if the woman he'd fallen in love with still existed beneath the corporate armor she now wore. The helicopter lifted off in a whirlwind of dust and paper, carrying Sarah away as suddenly as she'd arrived. Jack stood in his workshop doorway long after it disappeared, the envelope heavy in his hands, his mind full of contradictions. The prosthetic they'd created together sat on his workbench, catching the morning light. It represented everything he'd ever dreamed of. The chance to help people, to innovate, to make a real difference. But it also represented the most profound connection he'd ever felt with another person, a connection now complicated by wealth, power, and hidden truths. Dawn had promised change. Now Jack had to decide if he was ready for just how much change it had brought. The envelope sat unopened on Jack's workbench for 3 days. He worked on cars, fixed engines, went through the motions of his normal routine, but his mind kept returning to the moment the helicopter touched down and changed everything. The local paper lay folded beside his morning coffee, Sarah's face on the front page. Thompson Medical Technologies CEO announces revolutionary prosthetics initiative, the headline declared. The article painted her as a visionary leader, mentioning her own accident and recovery as inspiration for the company's new direction. Jack's name wasn't mentioned. His phone had dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers, lawyers, executives, probably reporters too. Sarah herself had sent only one text. I meant every word, both about the partnership and about us. He hadn't replied. Late one evening, after his last customer had left, Jack finally picked up the envelope. The papers inside were thick, heavy with legal language and corporate promises. But between the contract clauses and technical specifications, he found a handwritten note in Sarah's familiar script. Jack, the night you first kissed me, you asked what was going to change. I was afraid to tell you then, afraid you'd see me differently. I've spent my whole life being Sarah Thompson, CEO, the billion-dollar heiress, the poor little rich girl who lost her leg and bought her way back to normal. But in your workshop, covered in grease and arguing about hydraulic pressures, I was just Sarah, just a woman falling in love with a man who saw me, not my name or my bank account. What we created together isn't just a prosthetic. It's proof that dreams don't need corporate boardrooms or billion-dollar budgets. They need heart and talent and someone who refuses to believe in impossible. Whatever you decide about the partnership, please know that every moment with you was real. Every smile, every touch, every kiss, that was me. Just me. S. Jack set the note down, his vision blurring. He walked to the prototype still displayed on his workbench, running his fingers along its smooth surface. They'd created something remarkable here, something that could help thousands of people, but they'd created something else too, something just as precious and far more fragile. He thought about Sarah's face in the workshop, lit by late-night fluorescence as they worked. The way she bit her lip when concentrating, how her eyes sparkled when they solved a particularly tough problem. The feel of her in his arms when they danced across the concrete floor, testing their creation. Those moments had been real. The question was, could they survive in the harsh light of reality, where she was a CEO and he was just a mechanic with a gift for fixing things? The answer came to him as he stared at their creation. Sarah had trusted him to build something impossible. Maybe now it was his turn to trust her to build something even more challenging, a future where titles and bank accounts didn't matter as much as the truth they'd found in each other's arms. Jack picked up his phone, looking at her unanswered text. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed, "The partnership needs work, but us." That was perfect just as it was. "Coffee tomorrow?" Her response came seconds later. "Name the time. I'll bring the sugar." Sarah arrived at the workshop just as the morning sun was painting the sky pink. No helicopter this time, no expensive suit, just Sarah in jeans and a sweater, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing their prosthetic. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertainty written across her face. "You're wearing it," Jack said softly, nodding toward the prosthetic. "Every day since the fitting." She held out his coffee, 2 sugars black. Their fingers brushed as he took the cup, and the familiar electricity was still there, unchanged by revelations or corporate titles. Jack gestured to his office where he'd cleared space on his desk and set out the contract papers. "I've been reviewing the proposal," he said, as they settled into their chairs. "It's comprehensive." Sarah nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "Our legal team can be a bit overwhelming, but everything's negotiable, Jack. This isn't a corporate takeover. It's a partnership." "Why me?" he asked suddenly. "Thompson Medical has entire research divisions, teams of engineers. Why trust something this important to a small-town mechanic?" Sarah's eyes softened. "Because those teams of engineers, with all their advanced degrees and corporate funding, never created anything like this." She reached down to touch the prosthetic. "You did what they couldn't because you weren't bound by conventional thinking. You saw problems differently. And that's worth billions to Thompson Medical? It's worth everything to me." Sarah leaned forward. "Jack, I've seen both sides of this industry. I've been the CEO pushing for faster development, and I've been the patient waiting for technology to catch up with need. What you've designed here," she gestured to her leg, "this could help thousands of people who can't afford current prosthetics." Jack stood, moving to the window to watch the sun rise over his workshop. And what happens when corporate deadlines and profit margins start driving development? He heard Sarah's chair scrape back, felt her presence behind him. That's why I need you. Not just your technical skills, your heart, your integrity. You'll keep us honest. Jack turned to face her. She was close enough to touch, her eyes earnest and hopeful. And us? He asked quietly. What happens to us if I say yes? That depends, Sarah replied, reaching for his hand. Can you forgive me for not telling you everything sooner? Can you see past the CEO to the woman who fell in love with a brilliant, kind-hearted mechanic? Jack looked down at their joined hands, her manicured fingers entwined with his calloused ones. The woman I fell in love with has grease under her fingernails and argues about hydraulic pressures until midnight. Think she still exists? Sarah's free hand came up to cup his cheek. She's right here. The suits and helicopters? That's just window dressing. She squeezed his hand. This is real. Jack pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her waist. Then maybe we can figure out the rest together. The partnership, the development timeline, all of it. Together, Sarah echoed, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. When she pulled back, her eyes were sparkling. Does this mean you're accepting the proposal? Which one? Jack asked with a small smile. The business partnership or the personal one? Sarah's answering smile was radiant. Both. Definitely. Both. The morning sun streamed through the workshop windows, illuminating their embrace. Outside, the world of corporate meetings and legal documents waited. But here, in the quiet of his workshop, they were just Jack and Sarah, a mechanic and his love, ready to build something remarkable together. The transition wasn't seamless. Jack's workshop became a curious blend of old and new, familiar tools, sharing space with cutting-edge medical equipment, his father's old toolbox sitting beside sleek laptops running advanced modeling software. The regular customers still came with their engines and transmissions, but now they shared the parking lot with Thompson Medical's development team. Sarah insisted that Jack keep the auto repair business running. It's part of who you are, she said, understanding that his connection to the community was as important as his innovation. So they converted the warehouse next door into a research facility, leaving the original workshop exactly as it was, grease stains and all. Today, they were reviewing the first production prototypes. Sarah sat in her usual spot at Jack's workbench, their original prototype displayed alongside the new manufacturing samples. She wore a business suit. She had a board meeting later, but her fingers were smudged with grease from handling components. The production quality is excellent, she noted, examining a joint mechanism. But something feels different. Jack nodded, picking up their original prototype. The soul is missing. These are perfect, but maybe too perfect. He ran his thumb over a connection point they'd refined countless times during those late-night sessions. We need to find a way to mass-produce without losing the human touch. Sarah watched him with a soft smile. This was why she'd fought so hard to keep him in charge of development, despite the board's initial skepticism about putting a mechanic in charge of a medical device division. Jack saw beyond specifications and tolerances to the heart of what they were creating. What if we adjust the manufacturing process, she suggested, wheeling her chair closer to his. Even in CEO mode, she preferred her wheelchair in the workshop. It let her move more easily between workstations. Instead of fully automated assembly, we could implement a hybrid approach. Key components hand-finished by trained technicians. Higher costs, Jack pointed out, playing devil's advocate even as his mind raced with possibilities. Better outcomes, Sarah countered, her eyes sparkling with the familiar thrill of problem-solving. We're not just making devices, we're creating new beginnings for people. That's worth the investment. Jack set down the prototype and pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. This is why we work, he murmured against her hair. You understand both sides, the business and the human element. Sarah leaned into him, her hand finding his. We understand both sides, together. She glanced at her watch and sighed. Speaking of business, I have to head to the board meeting. We're presenting the production timeline today. Want me to come with you? Jack had been attending more meetings lately, learning to navigate the corporate world, just as Sarah had learned to navigate his. She shook her head. You stay here. Work on that hybrid assembly idea. Besides, she added with a grin, Mrs. Henderson called earlier about her Buick again. Oil change? Oil change, Sarah confirmed, gathering her papers. Some things never change. Jack helped her switch from her workshop wheelchair to her executive one. They kept both at the facility now, along with multiple prosthetics for different activities. As he watched her transform back into the CEO, smoothing her suit and checking her presentation notes, he marveled at how naturally they'd merged their worlds. Dinner tonight? She asked, pausing at the door. I was thinking we could test the new sports model. She patted the sleek prosthetic designed for athletic activities, their latest innovation. Race you to the restaurant, Jack teased, earning a brilliant smile. After she left, Jack turned back to the prototypes. Their first production run would ship next month, bringing hope to thousands who thought advanced prosthetics were out of reach. But more importantly, they'd proven that love could bridge any gap, even one between a small-town mechanic and a billionaire CEO, as long as they remembered to keep a little grease on their hands and a lot of heart in their work. The news hit like a thunderbolt during their morning coffee routine. Sarah's tablet displayed the headline, Meditech announces revolutionary low-cost prosthetics line. Below was a photo of a device that looked suspiciously similar to their design. They reversed engineered it, Sarah said quietly, her fingers tight around her coffee cup. They bought one of our first units and took it apart. The patent lawyers are already calling. Jack studied the photo, his mechanic's eye catching the subtle differences. It's a cheap copy. Look at the joint assembly. They sacrificed quality for cost. That connection point won't last 6 months of regular use. The market doesn't know that, Sarah replied, switching to other news sites. Our stock is already taking a hit. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Jack watched. Her shift into CEO mode, her shoulders squaring, jaw setting, but he could see the worry in her eyes. They'd helped thousands of people in the past months, but Meditech was a giant in the industry. They could flood the market with inferior products and destroy everything they'd built. Then let's show them why we're better, Jack said, standing up. He moved to their testing area, where their newest prototype sat waiting. Remember what makes us different? Sarah wheeled over to join him, a slight smile tugging at her lips. We care about the people, not just the profits. Exactly. Jack picked up the prototype. So let's prove it. We'll invite our patients back for testimonials, show the real-world results, let people see the difference quality makes. Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. And we'll launch the adaptive sports line early. Meditech can copy our basic design, but they can't replicate your latest innovations. They worked through the day, Sarah coordinating with their marketing team, while Jack fine-tuned the sports prototype. Their original patients were eager to help, sending videos of themselves running, dancing, even mountain climbing with their prosthetics. By evening, Sarah had turned the crisis into an opportunity. The new campaign would focus on real stories, real results, and their commitment to quality over quick profits. But more importantly, they'd accelerated their innovation pipeline. The board's behind us, Sarah announced, returning from her meetings. She found Jack in his original workshop, tinkering with yet another improvement. They've increased our R&D budget. Seems a certain mechanic has taught them the value of staying ahead through innovation rather than litigation. Jack looked up from his work, smiling at the sight of her. She'd shed her business suit for comfortable clothes, ready for their evening testing session. Good thing I have a CEO who understands the value of getting her hands dirty. Sarah wheeled closer, examining his latest modification. Is that a new pressure distribution system? Better than that? Jack grinned, showing her the design. It's a way to make the whole system more modular. Patients can upgrade components individually instead of replacing the entire unit. Meditech can copy our current design all they want. We'll be 2 generations ahead before they figure this out. Sarah's smile was radiant. This is why I fell in love with you. You don't just solve problems, you transform them into opportunities. I learned from the best, Jack replied, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of coffee and victory. They had weathered their first real challenge together, proving that their partnership, both professional and personal, could withstand any storm. The call came at midnight. A prosthetic failure during athletic testing. The patient was fine, but the incident triggered an automatic review of their entire production line. Jack and Sarah rushed to the facility, their date night interrupted by the crisis. "Show me," Jack demanded as soon as they entered the lab. The failed unit lay on the testing bench, its hydraulic system compromised. Sarah wheeled herself to the computer, pulling up the test data while Jack examined the physical damage. "It happened during a sprint trial," she explained, scrolling through readings. "Sudden catastrophic failure of the primary joint." Jack's hands moved over the components, his expression growing darker. "This isn't normal wear and tear. The metal's fatigued in a way it shouldn't be." He looked up at Sarah. "We need to check the material composition." The analysis revealed their worst fear. Their primary supplier had changed their manufacturing process without notification, resulting in microscopic structural weaknesses in key components. 5,000 units in circulation could be affected. "We have to recall them all," Sarah said immediately, already reaching for her phone. "Every single unit. The cost doesn't matter," she cut him off. "We're not risking anyone's safety." Jack watched her make the calls that would send their stock plummeting and cost the company millions. She didn't hesitate, didn't try to find a cheaper solution. In that moment, she wasn't a CEO protecting profits. She was the woman who'd trusted a small-town mechanic to build her a better leg. "I can fix this," he said quietly when she finished. "Not just repair the existing units, redesign them, make them better." Sarah turned to him, determination matching his own. "How long?" 3 days for the design, 2 weeks for testing and implementation." He moved to his workbench, already sketching. "We'll replace every unit with an upgraded version. The board will have concerns about the cost." "Then let me talk to them," Jack interrupted. "They trusted me before. They need to trust me now." Sarah wheeled to his side, taking his hand. "We'll talk to them together. Partners, remember?" They worked through the night, Jack designing while Sarah coordinated the recall. By dawn, they had a plan, not just to fix the crisis, but to emerge stronger. The new design would be more robust, the testing more rigorous, the quality control more stringent. They'd turn a potential disaster into proof of their commitment to excellence. As the sun rose, Sarah looked at their original prototype, still displayed proudly in the workshop. "This is what makes us different," she said softly. "We'll never forget where we started." Jack pulled her close, both of them exhausted but unbowed. "Or who we are together." 2 weeks after the recall announcement, Jack and Sarah stood before the Thompson Medical Technologies Board of Directors. Behind them, a screen displayed their new design specifications and testing results. On the table sat their latest prototype, a testament to sleepless nights and unwavering dedication. "The recall is complete," Sarah reported, her voice steady. "Every affected unit has been replaced with the upgraded design. Patient feedback has been overwhelmingly positive." One of the board members leaned forward. "And the cost? Substantial," Sarah acknowledged. "But the goodwill we've earned? Priceless." Jack stepped forward, indicating the prototype. "This crisis forced us to re-examine every aspect of our design. The result isn't just a fix, it's a breakthrough." He activated the unit, demonstrating its enhanced capabilities, stronger, more responsive, and even more affordable to manufacture. The board watched, impressed, as he detailed the improvements. Their competitors had expected them to falter, to cut corners in their rush to recover. Instead, they'd raised the bar even higher. "Our market share has actually increased," Sarah added. "Patients trust us more now, not less. They've seen that we'll put their safety above our profits." After the meeting in the privacy of Jack's workshop, they finally allowed themselves to celebrate. Sarah pulled Jack down for a kiss that spoke of relief, pride, and something deeper, the knowledge that they could face anything together. "We did it," she whispered against his lips. "Was there ever any doubt?" Jack smiled, though they both knew there had been plenty of doubts during those long nights of redesign and testing. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, looking out at the facility they'd built together. "You know what this means, don't you? We're stronger now than before the crisis, ready to expand." Jack moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "The adaptive sports line and the pediatric division. We've been discussing." She turned to face him, eyes shining. "Think bigger, Jack. We can help so many more people now." He pulled her up into his arms, both of them conscious of how far they'd come from that first meeting in his workshop. "Together," he said, making it both a statement and a promise. "Together," Sarah agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside, the sun was setting on their strongest day yet, painting the sky in colors of promise and possibility. Jack found the keys to his old workshop in the pocket of his tuxedo, right where he'd left them. The ceremony was over, the reception, in full swing at the Grand Hotel downtown, but he'd asked Sarah to make one stop before they left for their honeymoon. She entered the workshop in her wedding dress, using their latest prosthetic design, a special version they'd created just for this day. The ivory silk rustled against the concrete floor as she walked to him, her movement as natural as dancing. "Couldn't leave without saying goodbye to where it all began?" she asked, reaching for his hand. "Actually," Jack said, pulling her close, "I wanted to give you your real wedding present." He guided her to his workbench, where a small wooden box sat waiting. Sarah opened it carefully, gasping when she saw what lay inside. It was a key, not just any key, but the original key to the workshop, mounted on a delicate silver chain. "You're giving me your father's key?" "I'm giving us our future," Jack corrected softly. "The board approved it this morning. This workshop will become the Thompson Monroe Innovation Center, a place where mechanics, engineers, and dreamers can work together to create the next revolution in adaptive technology." Tears sparkled in Sarah's eyes as she lifted the necklace. "You're turning your workshop into an innovation lab." "Into our innovation lab," he said, fastening the chain around her neck, "where anyone with a good idea and a determined heart can find the support they need. Just like a certain CEO found when she wheeled into a humble mechanic's shop." Sarah pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of joy and promise. When they parted, she whispered, "Dance with me. One last time in this old workshop before it becomes something new." Jack took her in his arms, and they swayed together in the familiar space that had changed both their lives. Through the windows, the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold, blessing the past they were leaving behind and the future they would build together. 1 year later, the Thompson Monroe Innovation Center hummed with activity. Through the glass walls of the original workshop, now preserved at the